My name is Velma Dinkley.
Somehow, Velma has returned. Or perhaps more accurately, Velma has let out its last gasp before finally dying. I wasn't sure if I was going to watch the second season because, really, what more is there to say about this show? However, people kept saying they wanted to hear my thoughts on it, even after the show had long lost relevancy. So, I decided to suffer through it.
But don't blame me.
I blame you.
I was surprised to see how much had changed as they tried to save the sinking ship. I mean, it didn't make the show better, it just created a different kind of awful. The second season of the show is not a train wreck. A train wreck is a thing you watch where there is smashing and screeching and metal flying everywhere, and it just keeps going and going and going, unable to stop its own awful momentum. The second season is more coming across a train wreck. A giant field of twisted metal and debris where you can barely figure out that what you're looking at used to be a train. But before we get into that, let's talk about how a second season manifested itself for all of us to deal with, because I saw some confusion about this. When Velma's second season was announced, there was a natural belief that the first season's numbers must have been very good, despite it at one point being the lowest rated show on IMDb. This was spurred on by HBO Max reporting it had the biggest viewership of any of their animated content on their streaming service, neglecting to mention that a month before, HBO Max had enacted a massacre, removing almost every single animated show save a scant few. It's easy to be the best animated show when you're the only one there. So, naturally, people assumed that the second season happened because the first did such huge numbers. But if everybody agreed that it was awful, the only logical conclusion had to be hate watching.
She has no brain! Oh, I am not dissing her. She has no brain!
But this isn't true. I know both Saberspock and Alice Mark already mentioned that hate watching had nothing to do with it because the second season was already in production, but let me go into a little bit more detail to the best of my ability. Velma's second season isn't so simple as them just taking the first season and splitting it in two. That's kind of what they did, but also, no, that's not what they did. To explain, we're gonna have to go back a decade or two. So I hope you're ready for some data! And by data, I mean information I'm able to patch together because networks don't like discussing this. A long time ago, when we were still watching TV shows on this little box called a television, there was a practice in live-action shows called The Front 13, Back 9. Now, this gets a little outside of my wheelhouse because it's structured by American TV broadcast and scheduling, which I'm not very knowledgeable about, but here's the basics. When a pilot for a new TV show seems like it could be successful, based on both internal viewing, audience tests, ratings, and feedback from specific households, an order for a first season is placed by the network. The network's confidence in a show's success greatly affects many things, such as whether to give it a slot in primetime or as a mid-season replacement if another show underperformed, so they decided not to order more episodes of it and they need a new show to take its place. The time of year and tax season also affects these things. It gets very technical, which is code for I don't care enough about this topic to retain this kind of information.
ADHD! ADHD!
But overall, confidence in bringing in a large number of viewers is the big decider here. The Golden Girls pilot, for instance, not only was the brainchild of an NBC executive and had writers behind it who were already considered pedigree due to their previous shows, but also received instant overwhelming acclaim. Its preview screening got a standing ovation, and its broadcast premiere was an instant hit. Golden Girls had a full season ordered immediately and was given a primetime slot which it held onto its entire run. Compare that to another show, Seinfeld. Test audiences hated Seinfeld, saying it was confusing, boring, and they didn't understand why they should care.
This is the audience test on the pilot back in 1989. Pilot performance, weak.
No segment of the audience was eager to watch the show again.
Here's another great line. Viewers felt that Jerry needed a better backup ensemble.
However, when the Seinfeld pilot aired on broadcast, it finished second in its time slot, proving it could be a viable show. So, cancelling a Bob Hope special, the network used the money to order a first season of 4 episodes. The episodes rated high, but it took a year for the second season to air with an order of 12 episodes. It wasn't until season 3 when they got a full order of 23. These are the two extremes. Well, kind of. The actual extreme would be Heil Honey I'm Home, which only aired 1 episode, but that's kind of a special case. Usually, what networks would do for a show it's unsure of is the front 13 back 9 method. Rather than order a full season of 22 episodes on the show, the network would place an order for the first 13 episodes. Once the first episode started airing and they could look at the ratings and reviews, they would then decide if they wanted to place an order for the final 9 episodes of a season. This is often why shows before streaming would have a mid-season climax, in case the last 9 episodes didn't get ordered. Animation, even into the modern day, has something similar. If an animated pilot is picked up, an animated show will have a set number of episodes ordered as a complete season. And in some cases, if the episodes do well enough, the network might order an extension. This happened with Steven Universe Season 1, Chowder's first season, and Infinity Train, ironically enough. However, animation takes considerably longer to make, so usually a show's first season's episodes are the season, with no ambiguity to the end season episodes. So that's all good, right? Well, it was, until one particular show.
Bam, I didn't see that train. Now I got
Out of Jimmy's Head was an attempt by Cartoon Network to get in on the overwhelming success of live-action kids sitcoms like The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Hannah Montana, iCarly, etc. All of which were raking in viewers at this point in time. Of course, there was the problem of being Cartoon Network, but nevertheless, live-action programming was extremely desirable, not only because of the success of the competing kids' networks, but also because live-action shows cost a lot less to make and take a lot less time. So, after a test run with an original movie that did good enough numbers, the live-action sitcom Out of Jimmy's Head was quickly shot. And then a little snag happened in 2008 in the form of If you thought the 2023 writers' strike affected TV shows, it pales in comparison to the effects the 2008 one had on larger broadcasting. Many successful shows simply did not survive. Reality TV became a primary focus for most networks. Seasons and sometimes whole shows were cut short with unresolved plot lines. And late-night talk shows like Conan turned the fact that there were no writers into its major selling point. The fact that Saturday Night Live still exists after 2008 is a miracle. Out of Jimmy's Head had already been formed at this point. However, with the strike, no writing staff were involved with the editing or creative choices in post-production. And because it was live action with a much shorter turnaround time than animated cartoons, it ended up being the only show on Cartoon Network affected by the strike. By this point, Out of Jimmy's Head was not going to get a second season, and it was effectively cancelled. However, Cartoon Network aired the first 13 episodes, And then, when the strike happened, put the show on a week break, announcing it would be getting a second season. This second season was in fact the final 7 episodes of season 1. This was seen as a massively shitty move by people in the industry. The network had ordered 1 season, written contracts for 1 season, paid salaries for 1 season, and done all the legal work for purchasing 1 season, only then to cut it in half and sell it to the audience as 2, all the while concealing the fact that the show was already dead, while at the same time drumming up hype for it. Since its initial airing, the show is listed as only having 1 season of 20 episodes. The show itself is considered one of the worst Cartoon Network has ever aired, and the network has done everything it can to bury it, to the point the show became lost media for a while until somebody uploaded episodes to YouTube and the Internet Archive. However, it was successful enough to give the go-ahead to the short-lived Cartoon Network Reel block, although all the other shows were more reality TV based than written sitcoms. Every single one of the CN Reel shows received overwhelming poor reception by audience and rock bottom viewer numbers. The block was cancelled after only a year, putting the network in a bad position overall until Adventure Time, which was itself a failed pilot from Nickelodeon, which then went viral online. So, end of story, right? Network orders a season, writer's strike happens and makes broadcasts very chaotic for a while, leading to post-production problems and Cartoon Network pulling a fast one to try and get their money while they could, right?
Then he got an idea. An awful idea.
Cartoon Network
Got a wonderful, awful idea.
Information on the hows and whys of this are not really known because it's not something networks like talking about. But at some point out of Jimmy's head, they realized they could place an order for a full season of 20 episodes of a cartoon and then just split it in half and call it 2 seasons. I'd pretend you're watching this and wondering why, but you already know why.
Money.
By ordering 1 season and splitting it into 2, a lot of things go into effect. The biggest is a cut down in production time, and in animation, time is literally money. You get paid in the amount of seconds delivered. Less episodes means less time between post-production and airing, means less time to gauge audience feedback and viewership. But more than just halving the episode number of a season, cutting the seasons in half also means removing the break between the 2 seasons that often happens while the network decides whether to order a second season or not. The second season goes into pre-production pretty much as soon as the final episode of the first season is delivered. This means less turnaround time for the second season's release. This also means the network can advertise and drum up hype for a second season much sooner than if there had been a break, and they can get the second season out while the show is still fresh in everyone's minds. It also means you can decide how much money to put into marketing if the first season bombs. I want to make it clear, not every show on Cartoon Network following 2008 is like this. Cartoon Network has been experimenting with show formatting as the internet and streaming has become the new norm, even opening a new department in 2013 devoted to the creation of pilots to be released on YouTube and their streaming app. But the practice of getting 2 for 1 out of a single order has become much more common. This is why My Adventures with Superman had a second season ready to go pretty much as soon as the first season had ended, and why it getting renewed for a 3rd season saw a lot more fanfare and excitement from its creators on social media. The 2nd season was already a guarantee, the 3rd season was not. And then we come back to Velma. Velma had both its 1st and 2nd season ordered up front. Cartoon shows are made chronologically, working by episode order so the earliest episodes can be sent to post-production first. That way, the final episode of the season will be the last episode marked off as delivered. But the show doesn't go to broadcast until all episodes have been completed. They're not still making episodes of season 1 while season 1 is airing. And this is where my half understanding goes into full speculation. Because although both seasons were ordered up front, There are very clear signs in the second season that at some point, a hatchet had been taken to its writing during pre-production. Remember how one of the most annoying traits of Velma's character was just the absolute hateful personality on display? Velma acts superior to everyone around her, insults every character's intelligence, constantly expresses hatred towards men, brings up race as often as she can, gives massive and constant lip service to broader feminist terms and ideas while not displaying any deeper understanding of them, expresses deep-seated resentment towards her father, his girlfriend, and her half-sister, and constantly talks about herself as being a bad bitch. Remember that?
And how do you feel about race-blind casting, Daphne? I wasn't expecting such an enlightened answer from such
A bitch.
I'm not just a waitress, I'm also
A basic bitch who doesn't even know how to use hashtags. Fred's a rich white guy with a tiny dong. He did it. All our classmates are idiots or sheep, so let's assume they're high. But hey, look who's busy not finding my missing mother. Those are all white people, Daphne. Minorities on TV can only deal drugs to escape poverty. Exactly. I spit truth without a filter, like every comedian before #MeToo. Narc. White girl with too much money. White girl with too much money. What? Are you crazy? Finding Fred innocent would require me to admit I'd incorrectly prejudged someone. Wow, blonde-haired people have bad days too. If I were a rich white dude, I'd kill everybody just to get away with it.
Yeah, all of that is gone. Aside from a handful of episodes where gender and race are the core focus of the main plot, Velma the character no longer voices personal opinions about men, feminism, race, other people's intelligence, or how much she hates her own family. I think there's exactly one moment in season 2 where Velma talks about herself as being better than other people. Otherwise, topics about race and gender are instead peppered as non-sequitur jokes in the show, like Family Guy cutaway gags, but without the cutaway, or the gag. This is different than season 1 because in writing things this way, it no longer is the character expressing an opinion and a viewpoint. It's just the character saying something unrelated in what should be a joke if it wasn't for the fact that it's not funny. Remember in my video on season 1, I used this clip from Daria?
Edgy occurs when middle-brow, middle-aged profiteers are looking to suck the energy, not to mention spending money, out of the quote-unquote youth culture. So they come up with this fake concept of seeming to be dangerous when every move they make is the result of market research and a corporate master plan.
I can't even use this clip anymore because there's nothing edgy left. We've gotten to the point where one of my local fast food chains has more biting social commentary than this show.
Have you been working very hard without getting a promotion? Pull the race card.
It's because I'm black, right?
If that doesn't work, get your boss on nutritious, butterfly cut, flame grilled chicken.
I have no evidence of any rewrites, but I find it extremely interesting that the things that people were most vocally criticizing about the show's characters and overall nasty tone are exactly the things that have suddenly disappeared in the second season.
What an unbelievable coincidence!
I also noticed, whereas the first season had at least one major pop song per episode, the second season has maybe 2 or 3. I guess money had to be cut from somewhere to compensate the writing changes. The Breakfast Club episode doesn't even have "Don't You Forget About Me" at any point. That's how dire things are. Another thing, which is just funny to me, was the fact that whereas season 1 was released episode by episode, season 2 was just dumped onto HBO Max all at once. Most streaming services have learned that instead of encouraging binge watching, which was much more a focus a few years ago and is more Netflix's thing, it's better to release a show episode by episode because it keeps a show within the public conscious longer. When a show like Velma goes from an episode by episode release to just having the whole season dumped at once, this doesn't demonstrate high confidence by the network. Not to mention, before season 1's release, it had interviews with Mindy Kaling and lead writer Charlie Grandy, as well as several online magazine write-ups, and a full presentation at New York Comic Con. The only official word that season 2 was releasing outside of social media announcements was a single trailer released on YouTube by HBO Max. Perhaps not super unusual, but still worth remarking upon. Mindy Kaling has gone radio silent regarding this show, instead only posting and speaking about future projects she's heading and getting into passive-aggressive fights with Meghan Markle. Charlie Grandy made 3 posts promoting the second season before its release, but has otherwise not said anything else about it. And now I've got all the speculation out of the way, let's actually talk about the second season, which is an impossible thing to do.
When I went over season 1 of this show, I did the standard episode by episode breakdown, going into detail why individual scenes and jokes don't work, while also talking about the larger overarching plot. This is impossible to do for season 2. The second season of this show is possibly the most confused, directionless, unfocused show I have ever watched. I have been told stories by toddlers that were less meandering. One of the most basic bits of writing advice that gets thrown around is that you should write events to correlate with each other. Because of A, B happens, which results in C. But this show is the most and then show I have ever seen in my life. A happens, and then B happens, and then C happens, and then D happens, and so on and so forth. Until you reach specific plot points where the show goes, oh yeah, remember A, which happened like 4 episodes ago and both the audience and the show itself forgot about? Yeah, so try to remember, because now D is happening and it's kind of sort of because of A, but we only thought of it now. This has resulted in a show that is unreviewable the way I handled season 1. Because if I were to try and break the show down by events and episodes, this video would be just as unfocused and confusing as the show itself. People will think I'm focusing on unimportant nonsense and getting distracted from the actual story when, no, that's just what the show is like. To illustrate what I mean without going over the whole thing, here is a play-by-play of what happens to only one character throughout this show, Fred. Okay, I'll be honest with you guys, I had to rewrite this part of the script maybe 4 times. I would get to about episode 7 and then give up. Even trying to give an example of how pointless this show is impossible, because I can't cut the examples down small enough to illustrate my point without sitting here for like 10 minutes going, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Because even just Fred on his own jumps from one thing to another so often and with almost nothing interconnecting anything. Literally,
it's just a bunch of stuff that happened.
There is just no way for me to illustrate my point in a concise enough way and still show what I mean without this video having the exact same problem as the show itself. Fred becomes Catholic. Fred quits being Catholic. Fred is angry at Norville for killing his mom. Fred stops being angry at Norville for killing his mom. Fred says his mom was possessed and not murdered. Norville proves Fred's mom wasn't possessed. Fred bonds with Velma's mom because she starts dating his dad. Velma's mom turns down his dad's proposal and stops being involved with Fred's life. Velma's mom agrees to the proposal but continues staying out of Fred's life. Fred is suddenly obsessed with roller coasters. Fred gets a crush on an old woman when she mistakes him for a priest taking her confession. The old woman turns out to be the serial killer. The old woman turns out to be Scrappy. Norville's hallucinations turn out to really be Fred's mom's ghost. And on, and on, and on.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
So I'm throwing in the towel. I really wanted to do my best to illustrate this point better, but there is just no way for me to do that without making the worst video ever. Because Velma is the dictionary definition of toxic, in that not only is the show rancid all on its own, but the entire area around it and anything it touches ends up poisoned and irreparably harmed just from the misfortune of having come into contact with it. And all of this angst I just described about Fred and how impossible it is just to recap his part of the story and how even that is impossible to do because it's just such a lot of unconnected stuff that happens? Now take that exact amount of meaningless tripe and multiply it by Velma, Daphne, Norval, Amber, Velma's mom, Velma's dad, Sophie, Fred's dad, Gigi's dad, Daphne's mom's, Norval's grandmother, Lola and the other brains, and those are the characters that get main focus in the show. That's not a list of secondary characters or background characters. Those are the main characters in the story, not counting Scrappy. And every single one of them has the same amount or more, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, as Fred does. Listen, I am grasping you by the face just a little too tightly and asking you, do you understand? So fuck this. This show is so awful I can't even give an example to you in bite size because it's still enough to choke the life out of both of us. Let's just move on to the actual episodes where I try my best to regather my sanity.
Oh shit, here we go again.
I have seen many attempts by Western cartoons to try and mimic anime, whether trying to cash in on what was originally seen as a popular craze, attempts to transplant the long-form storytelling and visual style, to copy-pasting entire designs and animation when show creators wish they could make something as good as the anime they like, but don't have the skills to pull it off. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness, after all. But Velma manages to capture a style of anime that I have never seen an American show do before. And that is to have every single line of dialogue be comprised of nothing but breathless exposition.
We're moving in until my mom's occult bookstore takes off, so possibly forever. Hope that's okay.
I'm fine with it, but Velma is another story. I need to text her. Wow, Amber, I've never heard anyone beat Velma in an argument.
She didn't beat me. I'm just slowly formulating a response.
What's your ETA? Do I have time to, say, throw an air mattress out my window?
Okay, you know what? Forget this. There's been a murder, and the only person who can help me solve it is my old faithful Norville.
Also, you're right. I have been dismissive, but now I believe you don't have feelings for Norval.
Huh? What convinced you, Daphne? Was it my increasingly unhinged text? Because I will abuse that.
No, I just realized you're right about friends needing to trust each other.
He drives faster than a rocket, and he won the Grand Prix at Le Mans 4 years in a row. He's won just about every race he's ever entered.
No kidding!
Actually, no, that's not very fair. Speed Racer was dubbed by exactly 4 people, one of who also had to write the English script, recording an episode a day for $12 a day. Velma is an HBO original voiced by professional Hollywood actors like Mindy Kaling, Glenn Howerton, and Constance Wu, with a showrunner who cuts his teeth on Saturday Night Live and The Office. Incidentally, while making this video, I kept procrastinating watching Velma by watching Speed Racer instead because it's just a far more entertaining show. The reason Speed Racer sounds the way it does is because writer, voice actor, and voice director Peter Fernandez wrote the dialogue to match the Japanese lip flaps, which resulted in this fast-paced line delivery. The exposition dumping is actually due to the fact that the dub is relatively accurate to what's being said in the original Japanese. Velma, on the other hand, has no reason behind its breakneck dialogue. Just like Velma seems to fail the rule of having thing A cause thing B, which results in C, Velma also breaks the cardinal rule of writing, show don't tell. However, not in how it relates to action scenes. Car chases, missile explosions, violence, and helicopter crashes are happily shown on screen. But outside of large action moments, every spoken word in this show exists for the characters to tell you how they feel, what they think, and what their opinions are of their friends and family. At no point in this story do any of the characters act. The most popular girls in school rely on acting more than this show. Instead, Velma relies on spoken dialogue to explain to the audience how characters think and feel. Everything is narrated at you, and done so from a writing perspective that feels detached and unaffected by the show's internal reality. Season 1 was awful, but at least being a horrendous person is a personality trait. Not to mention, the show makes the classic mistake of thinking mentioning something topical and unrelated is the same thing as telling a joke. Meaning conversations that should have some kind of importance to the story lack any kind of emotional commitment because no interaction can go by without referencing something unrelated in a desperate attempt to sound witty. So the show fails both at being funny, as well as creating any kind of audience investment.
So how could you do this? If we'd been together 10 years, sure, married not buried, I get it. But it's been like 3 weeks.
I know. I was just so hurt after what you said at the seance. And I made the biggest mistake of my life. Can you forgive me?
No, rot in hell! Actually, wait. This is weird. I don't think I want you to rot in hell. That can't be right. Rot in hell! Nope. What's going on? Where's my anger?
Every line of dialogue is like this, throughout the entire show, for 10 whole episodes. This also means when the show writes itself into a corner where characters want to apologize to each other and reach some place of understanding, it comes across as inauthentic and extremely condescending towards the audience.
I'm sorry for being so close-minded about the soulmates thing. I care for you more than anyone. And if you want to call that being soulmates, I'm all for it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, Sam. That's gay love.
Even Family Guy manages to get people invested in its characters, but it is impossible to care about something that's constantly reminding you of how much it does not care about itself. The first episode's plot is that 3 weeks after the death of Victoria, Velma and Daphne stumble on the corpse of the sheriff who was killed at the end of season 1. We are introduced to a new character called Amber, whose mom is Thorn, one of the Hex Girls who would show up in the oldest Scooby-Doo media. And this is where the show managed to finally inflict a deep, personal wound in me because Thorn is voiced by Jennifer Hale.
I was in a band called the Hex Girls. We were a real hardcore witchy goth act. Never thought I'd say it, but I'm looking forward to killing myself.
The sting was eased a little bit when I realized Jennifer Hale has always voiced Thorn. I actually wonder if she has something in her contract like a character exclusivity clause or something. Maybe not, but it makes me feel better as to why she's in this trash. I did see some people saying that the show ruined Thorn. If they meant the indignity of having her be in this at all, then yeah, sure. But it seemed more like people were upset that for some reason they made Thorn old when she's the same age as the Scooby Gang in other shows. Luckily, Thorn barely exists in this show. I think she has maybe 5 or 6 lines throughout the entire thing, and she exposition dumps at the start of the Halloween special. Other than that, she's mostly just a background character. This is the only way to survive this show relatively unscathed. But I disagree that making her old somehow ruins her character. So, instead of being a sexy 20-something vampire girl singing about saving the environment, she's a middle-aged Wiccan who runs an occult bookstore with her non-binary child? I'm probably showing my age, but I don't think turning Thorn into a goth MILF is ruining the character. I would comment on Amber more, but I am confused as to why they're here. Much like Gigi in season 1, who gets added to the cast but doesn't seem to have any role to fill, and who has been all but discarded in season 2, Amber never does anything at any point that doesn't exist to forward the main characters in some way. The way they're introduced, you might think they're being set up to be a foil for Velma, but they really aren't. They just cause Daphne to do things which make Daphne and Velma have friction. But Amber themselves has no relationship with any of the characters outside of this, and never becomes a character in their own right. Oh, by the way, that pentagram thing that ended the first season as a cliffhanger and I said would lead to nothing, yeah, it led to nothing. It's revealed it was an ad for Thorn's bookstore. Meanwhile, Fred has started his supernatural investigation business, which means that Velma in the first episode was lying.
I've decided to finally share the bone-chilling events that drove me to assemble the greatest team of spooky mystery solvers ever. Yeah, it was me, not Fred and his weird sex fan.
Fred has also decided to become Catholic because, according to him, people expect ghost hunters to be religious. No, they don't. People don't even expect ghost hunters to believe in ghosts. Anyway, Fred says it's all about giving customers what they want, and as a gimmick, he's even added Fuamoko to his team. We never see him working with these dogs again.
Maybe solving mysteries with dogs is a mistake.
Velma is trying to juggle her feelings for Norval and Daphne after the finale of the last season caused a massive fallout. But she and Norville very quickly abandon that drama when they both admit they have no romantic tension between them and the plot point is dropped.
Which is why it's weird how little sexual tension I'm feeling right now.
Huh, yeah, I also feel nothing, except the general weirdness that goes with being in a coffin.
Norville, feeling guilty for killing Victoria, is having hallucinations of a blood-covered Fred, which only go away when he eats. These later morph into him hallucinating Victoria herself. I don't know why he hallucinates Fred in the early episodes, because it conflicts with the fact that it's later revealed this really is Victoria's ghost.
Yeah, well, whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
I see, alright, yeah. But in episode AG4...
Wizard.
Anyway, his parents are trying to get him to smoke weed to help, but Norville refuses because this show is doubling down on that haha, it's funny that Shaggy is anti-drug joke. He constantly tries to apologize to Fred for killing his mom, but Fred refuses to accept, saying his mom was not a murderer and was possessed by the ghost of Norville's grandmother, the brain-swapping lady. He forgives Norville in the second episode, but it doesn't make the hallucinations go away. Daphne's moms are running for joint sheriff since the sheriff, died. Amber and Thorne are also living at Daphne's house for no real reason other than until they get their feet or something. It's literally just so the show can have Amber make Velma react to this, but the plot point never actually amounts to anything and is only mentioned twice. Sophie talks about them living next door later in the show, but it's unclear if this is still Daphne's house or a new house, because the show never bothers to clarify the plot points it brings up, and I can't care enough to keep track of who is living where. Velma's mom has been in a writing rut, but gets past it after sleeping with Velma's biology teacher, who is then killed in the mid-credits scene.
I'm a Roman Catholic, and have been since before I was born.
This episode focuses on the town's tradition of having teenagers oil all the creaky door hinges. The flashback as to why is irrelevant to the plot, but it has some funny posing in it. I'm a big fan of these two guys playing cards. After the biology teacher is reported as missing, Velma notices Fred taking notes, suspecting it's connected to the sheriff's murder. She then attaches herself to him to find out what he knows, and when he tries to tell her to go away, she rigs the Creaky Friday team up so she and Fred have to work together and she can pester him. And by pester him, I mean get into multiple arguments about religion and faith. You will be shocked to find out Velma is not only an atheist, but a full-blown anti-theist.
Believing Norville is innocent is not the same as believing in ghosts or a god that dictates who wins our top music award.
So you just think we're what? Intelligent meat?
Don't be reductive. I think we're horny meat. It's a godless universe, so just help me cheat.
I feel I need to pause here and explain what I mean when I say argue about religion. Because the natural assumption is the show is taking edgelord potshots at Christianity, like you'd see in South Park or Family Guy. But in Velma, no, there's none of that. There are no arguments made for or against religion that have any kind of bite to it. And the worst barb the show throws at the Catholic Church is to say, the Catholic Church used to value tradition and look how powerful they were. Now they only have power over Boston and the Supreme Court. I mean, okay. It is the most milquetoast level of religion is dumb arguing I've seen from an adult piece of entertainment. It's like the show brought up religion as a target to make fun of, but then after the topic was introduced, they chickened out and didn't want to say anything that might actually upset someone.
So you let Norville walk, but I'm the fanatic for using a saint's toe to protect us from demons.
I'm not saying I wanted this to become a super edgy show purposefully trying to ruffle feathers, like the first season, but nobody brought religion into this but the show itself. They chose to make this the focus of the jokes. For a show that originally wrote itself to be intentionally antagonistic towards its audience and mistook being provocative as being witty, it's kind of embarrassing that you are getting outclassed in making fun of Catholicism by things that were made over 40 years ago.
Every stone is sacred. Every stone is great.
This is what I meant, that there must have been some kind of hacksaw taken to this season's writing, because it feels neutered to such a degree that it's less edgy than Austin Powers. And Velma is supposed to be an R-rated show. Anyway, it doesn't matter, because Fred quits being Catholic at the end of this episode after learning he has to give up 10% of his income. They didn't even do anything with Norval pretending to smoke weed and Fred being religious. It's possibly the easiest setup for jokes you could get in a show like this. Come on!
Just say no to the marijuana.
But instead, they have Fred and Velma argue about faith in a way that doesn't say anything instead. But Norval pretending to smoke weed is another plot point that's dropped in the next episode. Velma and Fred briefly suspect Norval of killing the sheriff, but Norval admits he was only in the police office disguised as a ghost to steal his grandmother's journals, hoping they can help him cure his hallucinations. Amber and Daphne are teamed up for Creaky Friday, and after Amber was hit by a car, the two wind up oiling the doors in the hospital and discover that both the sheriff and the biology teacher had their dicks removed by the serial killer.
Ooh, whoa, hey, whoa, hey, TMI, cannot unsee that, whoa!
Are you done masking your fear with performative overreaction?
Yeah, wait, whoa! Okay.
The amount of times something happened in this show, and I was just like, okay, reached well within the double digits. Also, Amber introduces the idea of manifesting to Daphne. There's some convoluted nonsense about Daphne's mom's leaking info to Fred to solve the murder, but all it really amounts to is the sheriff's brother deciding to run for sheriff against the moms. I don't know why this plot point exists, and I wonder if the show at one point planned to pull a South Park and try to parody the American elections. But they never actually do, and this whole competing campaigns thing is just a B-plot in a show where everything is a B-plot. This episode also introduces the only characters I like this season, which is the coroner, who has an unfortunate quirk where every single thing he says is unintentionally creepy.
Are we in a morgue?
Yes. Welcome to your final resting place.
And his husband.
Eventually, he meant to say, your final resting place, eventually.
This is genuinely a very funny setup, and I kind of love them. So of course they get killed in the mid-credits scene.
Shaboopy, shaboopy, shaboopy.
Velma catches her mom with Fred's dad, and during this conversation, Dia finds out there's a science fair coming up, which becomes the bigger plot this episode.
Okay.
Fred's dad tries to win Velma over by taking her to his mansion and saying they're going to do a musical number where the poor person is initially resistant towards the rich lifestyle, but by the end of the song changes their mind.
It's like a big talk of Act 2 musical number. You can lead a life of leisure,
Washing a bath of ancient treasure.
Here's a robot that thinks you're clever.
Not interested whatsoever.
They act like this is a common musical trope, but the only musical I can think of with a song number like this is Annie. You know, the one where Annie's happiness at a large house is because she's an orphan. Also, in my personal opinion, if you want to do a musical parody, even if it's only a single song, you need to actually understand musicals and have some talent. The reason the South Park movie is a musical and why the music in it is really, really good is because Trey Parker majored in music in college and grew a deep-seated hatred for Oklahoma specifically, and he and Matt Stone made it their life's mission to make fun of it at every opportunity.
There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. Sky is blue and all the leaves are green.
There's a bunch of birds in the sky.
Seth MacFarlane might take the lazier route of, instead of writing his own music, he just writes new lyrics to existing musical numbers, or just doing them wholesale. But even this lower effort version of the joke still requires the writer to actually be familiar with the musicals they're using. Have any of you ever heard of Anchors Away until Family Guy used it in episodes? Hell, are any of you even aware of Anchors Away now? MacFarlane himself is an accomplished vocalist in his own right. His mockery of musicals and Family Guy is because he already has understanding of the genre. That's why it's there. He likes this stuff.
Oh, tell me quick, ain't another kick in the
You can't just fart out a tuneless jumble of noise that sound like an AI approximation of a musical number and think you've done something. If you want to have a funny musical number, your understanding of musical numbers needs to be sharp and honed if you plan to cut into the subject. As you might have guessed, this is the only attempt at a musical number in this whole show, and it's only in service of a bad joke that isn't even funny to begin with. I think it says a lot about how flat this joke falls that I have not heard any other cartoon reviewers even mention it. Anyway, the point is Fred's dad is going to help Velma win the science fair. Meanwhile, Fred gets help from Dia, who lets him pick his own subject and lets him do his own research because Victoria just paid staff to do it for him in the past. This results in Fred and Dia growing closer, and Fred learning that getting a hug from a parent feels good, because Victoria always lied to him that hugs made children weak. Believe it or not, this is a detail which becomes plot relevant later. Meanwhile, Norval has been using his grandmother's journals to locate where anxiety in the brain is located. He's been getting the help of the brains, specifically Lola. And they decide to make this their science project, where Norval is just going to fry his own brain to turn off his anxiety. Daphne and Amber team up to do their project on manifesting and whether or not it can be scientifically proven. This causes a rift between Velma and Daphne because Daphne believes in things like soulmates, which Velma is staunchly against. To the point of throwing the very notion back into Daphne's face and implying she's stupid to even consider these things. Also, the other popular girls find Amber weird, and Daphne potentially becoming friends with them is hurting her popular girl credibility. This gets dropped by the end of the next episode. Velma wins the fair despite not doing anything because Fred's dad paid Neil deGrasse Tyson to be her partner. Is it Neil deGrasse or Neil deGrasse? I just realized while reading the script I don't actually know how to pronounce that properly. Anyway, the other kids get angry and Velma decides being rich isn't worth everybody hating you, and the plot point is dropped. Fred ends up winning instead because he was the only kid whose parents didn't do the assignment for him according to the judge. Which makes no sense when Norval's over here frying his brain. Incidentally, said brain frying did cure his hallucinations, but also removed his empathy. So Norval is extremely mean to his dad and admits to not smoking weed.
Take it back. Or what, loser?
Incidentally, this is my favorite frame in the whole show. However, because of this, all the kids get detention. The episode starts with Velma stating that as Daphne's best friend and girlfriend, she knows for a fact that Daphne is not Wiccan. Oh, by the way, Amber introduced Daphne to Wicca. The kids are all taken to school for their Saturday detention, and this is the episode my audience most warned me about, because this is the Breakfast Club episode.
Detention? Teens reduced to a single character trait? Oh no, you wouldn't.
Oh, I would. We're doing a Breakfast Club, baby.
In case you're new to my videos, I really like the Breakfast Club. I don't know whether it's in my top 10 if I were to sit down and make a list, but it's a movie I have referenced a lot while making these videos, specifically for its character writing. So, of course, knowing this, my audience presumed that this episode was going to hurt me personally. But the big plot twist is, it really didn't. And that's because this show has a bizarre tone throughout the entire thing, but no more apparent than in this episode, where none of the characters nor the show itself want to be here. And not in the usual way you build a comedy off of characters who don't want to be here. British comedy for decades have been built around the simple concept of a group of people who are stuck somewhere they don't want to be, when nobody really likes each other, and they just sort of have to deal with it. And the comedy comes from watching the group of people who do not function together sharing a space against their will, and often setting up their own failures or each other's, because of their inability to form a cohesive dynamic, either because they're too arrogant, too stubborn, too prejudiced, or too stupid. It's not fully based in watching someone else's misery, more it's watching someone completely overreact and lose their shit in an uncomfortable situation that we both relate to, but we also don't particularly feel sorry for the character because this is mostly their own fault. These types of comedies are both acknowledging the discomfort most of us will feel at some point in life and also to provide a cathartic outlet.
You just have to worry for the both of us. I'm telling you, if the good Lord
is mentioned once more, I shall move you closer to him. Now, please!
Velma, on the other hand, has a different kind of nobody wants to be here vibe to it. The show will at multiple points create situations that are extremely obvious setups for jokes, but the characters will instead simply not want to do it. It's like the omnipotent driving force of the story keeps putting things at play to pull out performances and stories from the cast, but the characters and plot as a whole get bored of it and just throw it away after barely giving it any attention at all, so they can instead whine about their interpersonal relationships ad nauseum. This episode is the best example of this. The adults of this episode no less than 4 times say, "We're doing a breakfast club," while the teenagers all lament that they don't want to do a Breakfast Club reference episode. The blatantly obvious setup here would be to have the characters unwillingly forced into doing Breakfast Club references completely against their will and to their great annoyance. Like fate itself refuses to let them off the hook and conspires to make sure they do a Breakfast Club episode. But instead, the episode goes, "This is going to be a Breakfast Club episode," and the characters go, "Ugh, we don't want to do that." And then the narrative goes, "Oh, okay," and then it's dropped and none of the characters engage with the point further, nor do they actually fill it with anything else apart from vapid pantomimes of teenage relationship tropes. Not even the tropes themselves, because the dialogue is too detached and self-referential for it. Meaning that every situation crafted for humor dies on the vine as the characters refuse to interact with it completely due to apathy. This results in an episode where not a single Breakfast Club reference actually happens in the Breakfast Club episode, apart from the library having a similar sculpture as in the movie, and one scene where Norval's dad forgets he's supposed to be crawling in the ceiling and makes a different 80s movie reference instead, which is a joke he makes sure to explain to us in case we didn't get it.
What the hell are you doing up there?
The Triple Lindy from underrated 80s comedy Back to School. Wait, Velma meant crawl through the ceiling like in the Breakfast Club. Oh, damn it.
This episode did not cause me any psychic damage because it refuses to be a Breakfast Club episode. That's a unique version of bad I've never seen a show do before. At least other garbage, awful, unfunny parodies of movies try to be parodies. Velma doesn't even try. The show feels like it was a mandatory group project required to pass the school year. I still have some beef with some of the other things said in this episode, however. One thing this episode seems most focused on related to the Breakfast Club is Norval's dad and Velma's dad being annoyingly nostalgic for the 80s, when they were in high school. In a way where it's clear the show is trying to shame and mock these people, and by proxy, any members of the audience for having affection for the pop culture of that decade.
Your Saturday detention looks just like The Breakfast Club. Best movie of the best decade, when you ignore the nukes, crack, and AIDS.
In their attempt to portray people who enjoy 80s media, they have Norval's dad and Velma's dad more than once proclaim how The Breakfast Club is best movie ever.
By following the rules of the 80s best movie, you'll be here until unsanctioned hijinks lead to tidy teen issue resolution.
Dude, if you look at Letterboxd, The Breakfast Club isn't even considered the best 80s movie by popularity. And when it comes to just 80s movies ratings in general, The Breakfast Club isn't even on the first page. Because I am a pedantic weirdo who has a lifelong fascination with film, I decided to check several of these big review consensus sites regarding 80s film. None of them rate The Breakfast Club as the best movie of the 80s, and most of them actually agree on what the best movie of the 80s is. The best movie from the 80s is generally agreed to be the 1985's Come and See. But Velma is not going to have any comment on that. No, much easier to build a straw man of both 80s films, as well as the people who herald that era as being a high point in cinematic history. It's like the joke in 372 Pages We'll Never Get Back, where they talk about Ready Player One and how this book is highly recommended to people who like 80s movies like The Last Emperor and Field of Dreams. For interest sakes, go to Letterboxd or IMDb or any of these sites and have a look at just the onslaught of groundbreaking cinema that came out between 1980 and 1991. Of course, Velma has its own annoyances with films from the 80s and why its continued accolades are annoying. That being that people who continue talking about it are just out of touch Gen X losers who can't move on with their lives.
But teens are over 80s references, and yet every time pop culture tries to move forward, some Gen X loser like you holds a boombox over his head and we all have to moonwalk back to 1982.
The moonwalk wasn't debuted until 1983, you dork!
Nobody cares anymore!
Maybe the 80s can still teach us stuff.
No, they can't. It's time for me and every guy my age to stop living in the past and start living in the even more distant past of the Civil War like we're supposed to.
I watch a lot of movie reactions on YouTube, mainly because watching people experience something I like for the first time is like crack cocaine to me. It leads to frustration sometimes, but that's because I prefer reactors who are honest when they don't like something, rather than a shill channel that never has a negative thing to say about a film. Anyway, my point is, I have never seen someone born around the early 2000s who did not come away with the opinion that the 80s was a really good era for movies. In fact, I have never heard a Gen Z or Gen Alpha person say even once that they are tired of 80s rehashing. If anything, most of them come away from watching 80s movies angry that there isn't the same kind of quality being made these days.
I loved this, and I think I've praised every 80s movie that we've watched on this channel. I feel like the 80s is like peak movies, peak music.
Yeah.
Like, just, I'm bummed that I didn't get to experience the 80s.
This could have been, you got the 80s, and you got comedy, you got the jokes. Like, this could be very for its time period, but it isn't. And because of that, it's timeless. And I think that is honestly the reason why everybody likes The Breakfast Club. I think I understand that now.
Y'all's practical effects and special effects makeup, like, no wonder your generation is so full of, like, hard asses. Kids and teens of the 80s are how you are. This shit's scary!
That made me so emotional. I was not expecting that at all. I think I just fell in love with this movie.
Even now, like, you guys say, this was older generations. No, even now, you guys do not understand that children, especially teenagers, are still being judged and ridiculed for everything they do in life, and people don't even know them.
It's such a funny movie, and it's pretty relatable too, like, everything that she's going through and stuff. It's great.
So this rant that Velma the character and Velma the show gives doesn't sound like it's being written from the perspective of a high schooler in 2024. It feels like the frustrated venting of a writer who works in Hollywood, who's resentful that the larger movie audience keep pointing out how mediocre and bad the major Hollywood films have been for the past few years and how they continue to spiral down in quality, and comparing the poor performance of modern Hollywood to the much better quality of films from the 80s. This sounds like a Hollywood denizen angry that they can't escape the shadow of giants, and in their frustration, they are putting words in the mouths of Gen Alpha characters to make it seem that people must only be stuck on the 80s due to nostalgia and a midlife crisis, rather than an honest desire for a return to quality filmmaking. Either that, or a frustration that original subject matter is a lot harder to sell in Hollywood these days, and that most mediocre writers attach themselves to popular IPs to be able to tell a story they really want to tell because that's all the big studios feel comfortable greenlighting, only to have their writing rejected by the audience for being mediocre, which is why they had to leech onto popular franchises from the 80s in the first place. Which is why so many of these newer entries into 80s franchises seem to harbor such resentment for their own legacies and lore. But instead of aiming the criticism at Hollywood's inability to greenlight fresh projects, or that modern entries trying to resurrect 80s franchises are terrible, Velma the show blames the actual movies from the 80s for this problem. That's what it sounds like to me, anyway. To rewind back to The Breakfast Club, however, it's also really obvious that the show creators for Velma haven't actually watched The Breakfast Club in a long while and are relying on cultural osmosis to remember what the movie is about. I don't make this accusation lightly either, because it's not that they talk about the film and are slightly off about details, it's that they describe The Breakfast Club in such a factually incorrect way that it's the literal opposite of the entire movie's theme.
Each of you is dealing with a common teen issue. This is all standard stuff, babe.
Hold on. Saturday detention? Teens reduced to a single character trait? Oh no, you wouldn't.
Oh, I would. We're doing a Breakfast Club, baby.
The entire thesis statement of The Breakfast Club and why it has multi-generational staying power is because The Breakfast Club is an intimate discussion about how American high school social structures are all a farce, and that every single member of The Breakfast Club, despite each one coming from a completely different social circle, are the exact same thing. They are children who are victims of the whims and pressures of adults. Every kid in the movie is in some form or another a victim of their parents. Sometimes in a very dark and straightforward way like Bender, or the far more insidious and horrifically ordinary way like Allison.
What did they do to you?
They ignore me.
Before The Breakfast Club, the portrayal of teenagers in American media fell into a few set categories. As children to support the adult cast, absorb life lessons and be precocious, as sex-crazed partygoers, as fodder for slasher movies, or teens within larger societal problems of the day such as gang culture and delinquency. And romance. Always romance. The Breakfast Club is one of the first, if not the first, major American film that dismantled the surface-level constructs that everyday, normal teenagers had been boxed into, and instead wrote them as not only real people, but real children, while at the same time taking a very focused strike at the perceptions of adults that teenagers are malleable puppets that can be warped into what adults desire, or discarded as a lost cause if they don't conform to the exact standards that the adult wants. The Breakfast Club is remarked upon by the vast majority of people who saw it as teenagers that it was the first movie they'd seen where they felt a movie understood them. And all this while the film masks itself as a funny teen comedy.
My God, are we gonna be like our parents?
Not me. Ever.
This is something even modern American shows and movies struggle with. When modern American TV doesn't portray teenagers as overly sexualized 20-somethings entirely involved in their relationships with each other, sordid town secrets, or mental health struggles, the shows and movies made since The Breakfast Club are built upon the message that it doesn't matter which label you are, we are all a team. Whereas The Breakfast Club is built on the message, there are no labels, there are only people pressured to fill boxes. Not to mention, the stereotype in The Breakfast Club of the jock, the prom princess, the nerd, the bad boy, and the weird kid didn't exist as stereotypes before this movie. This movie was not based on pre-written stereotypes. This movie was built representing real kids that existed in the 80s. It was only with teen-focused media following The Breakfast Club that the movie's portrayal of kids in the 80s got repeated and repeated and repeated until these constructs of the jock, the nerd, the princess, etc. became cliches in movies and TV shows. The fact that Velma states that The Breakfast Club is somehow a poster child for enforcing teen stereotypes is the most damning piece of evidence that the people who wrote this haven't watched The Breakfast Club since the 80s. They couldn't have, when the opening narration of the film explains the entire movie's ethos before a single character has even appeared on screen.
You see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, the most convenient definitions.
It's extra funny when they could have used any other teen movie from the 80s to make their point. But they just chose the one which is entirely built on dismantling teen stereotypes. Probably because The Breakfast Club is the most recognizable name when it comes to 80s teen movies. It's like choosing Shrek as your example of how animated movies are only ever about traditional fairy tales. Anyway, the gang refused to do anything that might be seen as 80s hijinks by Norval's dad, so mostly just sit around. Because subversion, I guess. Wow, what a shock. I expected the characters in this show to do something, but instead, they did nothing. I love subversive media.
The kids aren't doing anything fun or rebellious. They're just doing nothing, like in a 70s movie.
Yes, because nothing exciting came out in the 70s. Norval's hallucinations come back as his empathy returns. I guess he just got better from electrocuting his brain. Amber says they actually saw a presence around Norval and thinks it might actually have been Victoria's real ghost.
Mother, if you're here, send a sign. It is her ghost. She's ignoring me.
The gang decide to hold a seance. Velma's scheming with the popular girls to prove Amber is a fraud so that Daphne can get over the Wiccan kick she's on. Fred offers his mom's backup locket as the item they can use for the seance, saying she was buried with her real locket with his picture in it, and this one only shows Fuamoko. But during this seance, he reads on the locket that this is Victoria's only locket, breaking his belief that his mother actually cared about him. Daphne gets upset that Velma tried to sabotage the seance just to prove she's not a witch, insisting that she's given this a lot of thought and read a lot of books on it, and that Velma knows she's been struggling with her personal identity. Honestly, Daphne's only concrete personality trait besides being a popular girl is her struggles with identity, so she's right in this instance.
You're up to something.
No, I'm not. I just feel it's weird when adults hold hands.
You're not adults. You're 15, remember? Velma yells that she's not afraid of the supernatural or religion or the unexplained. She's afraid of weirdos who believe in that stuff like Daphne. Meanwhile, Norval's dad, Velma's dad, and Velma's mom have an uninteresting subplot about knowing each other in high school, and Velma's dad approaches Gigi's dad and reminds him that they have unfinished... or something, I don't know. They knew each other in high school, that's all you need to know. This is also one of the few episodes in the show that actually has a musical montage at the end. And the song is Haunted by Beyonce, and not Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds.
You know, it's amazing. You are 100% wrong. I mean, nothing you've said has been right.
Also, Norval finds out his brain-swapping grandmother is still alive.
I'm here to make inflammatory statements on the internet, and then turn my notifications off.
This is the episode where things go completely off the rails. The coroners are found dead in the library, somehow. I have no idea how they got there. They're also in a pentagram for some reason. When we learn who the killer is, this makes no sense. It's Scrappy. The killer is Scrappy. Spoilers. For that matter, the coroners being in the library at all doesn't make sense since they're killed in the morgue. The killer isn't trying to get caught because why would he hide the sheriff's body? It's never explained. They just needed it for this episode to exist. Velma, still burning with anger towards Amber for supposedly driving a wedge between her and Daphne, rather than accepting she and Daphne just have incompatible beliefs, decides to make a social media post implying that Amber is a witch and might have had a hand in the murders. And because this is an unsubstantiated post on social media meant to fearmonger, everyone believes it. This would actually be one of the only on-point satires of the show if the dialogue wasn't written like dog water.
Okay, but it won't do any good. My posts get treated like sensible tax reform, mocked and ignored.
That's because teen social media is about making people horny. Adult social media is about making people afraid of their neighbors.
There are jokes that make you laugh, okay? And then there are jokes that you have no reaction to. But every now and then, there's a joke so bad, it makes you less laugh.
Feels a little shallow, TBH. Wait, brain chemistry just changed. This is the greatest feeling in the world.
Negative amount of
You'll
laughing.
be sitting there normal, and then the joke will happen, and then you'll slightly less smile, even though you weren't smiling. And that is called non-medi.
Riled up by the post, the men in town decide to burn Amber at the stake. However, Velma makes another social media post implying that only men who are endowed have been killed. So if you're not rivaling Charlie Chaplin, you're probably safe. The men gathered at the witch burning all awkwardly say that they should probably go home because they're in the possible victim category. Again, this might actually have been a funny situation if the dialogue was better. You don't get points for your concept. In comedy, you need to stick the landing. The men leave. Velma accidentally sets the pyre on fire anyway. Velma's dad backs into a fire hydrant and saves the day. And Sophie and Velma's mom become mortal enemies because Fred's dad was going to propose to Velma's mom before Velma's dad proposed to Sophie, but Velma's mom turned down the proposal.
Everybody got that?
Oh, by the way, Amber has no opinions or feelings about Velma framing them for murder on social media because Amber isn't here to be a character.
Meanwhile,
Norval and Daphne discover his grandmother is still alive and hiding from the government after perfecting the Scooby project, and now runs a brain spa because turns out if you put someone in a jar with their thoughts for a while, they tend to find out who they really are due to the self-reflection. She offhandedly mentions Lola and the brains are dying and need the solution they're floating in to be changed. Daphne and Norval's grandmother swap brains so Norval's grandmother can save them without drawing suspicion from the government, and Daphne can spend some time figuring out who she is.
Everybody got that?
Good, great, fine. I need a drink. And by drink, I mean a frozen coffee and something else to watch for a second, so, whatever. To be continued. See you later. Special thanks to Roland Marty, Zendrion, Catharsis939, and me and my gaster. And thank you as always for supporting my work.